Good afternoon, I'm Professor Alan Patching from Bond University, and right up front I need to make an apology to some of you, because for some of you in various parts of the world it's not afternoon. In fact, you might be up at 3 o'clock in the morning on your way out or on your way home. Wherever you are, wherever you happen to be, welcome to our Bond University Now Talk. So what are we going to be covering in this particular session? We're going to be looking at why change is such an important part of life. In fact, I'm going to put to you the proposition that change is life's only constant. Now, one of the things that won't be constant during this little presentation is my looking at you right down the barrel of this crammer in front of me. And the reason for that is in front of me around the room, I have a room full of delightful people who've come in to listen to the talk one-on-one, and welcome to you people as well. So I'll begin talking a little bit about change as I understand it. I may agree with your thoughts, I may disagree. If you want to challenge, if you want to ask questions, get in touch just by using the Twitter or Periscope connections that you're looking or contacting us through, and we'll be happy to address your challenges or your questions as we go along. So let's now look at this topic of change. According to just about every dictionary on the planet, in your language or mine, in your part of the world or here, change is about to become different, to make different, to adjust from a current circumstance to a different circumstance. So what's the relevance of that to the people who might be looking at this? Well, it could be any number of relevances. One, you may have made a career choice several years ago. When I was quite young, probably even younger than many of the people watching, I had dozens of career choices before I took the one I took. And as I'll tell you later, I actually followed several other career choices after I started in my career. So change and going about it in a sensible way is a very, very important part of life. Some of you, for example, will be looking at starting university, maybe in our part of the world, maybe in your own, either in the next couple of months or perhaps in the middle of next year, for those of you in Europe, for example. And you might be saying, well, we had a choice of career path in mind, but the marks weren't as good as we expected, or we didn't get a university placement, and that's a terrible setback. So what can we do about that? Well, that's what we're here to talk about, but let's start with some generic principles to begin with, shall we? So as I move on to address some of the questions that were raised by the group here before, I'll address them to the people in camera audience as well as those in room audience. When we talk about change, sometimes it's not welcome. Sometimes we don't want to be doing the things that we feel we're forced to do. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes a change opportunity. If someone walked into anyone here now and said, how would you like to change your plans for the next two or 3 weeks and enjoy a first-class, fully paid holiday anywhere you'd like to go in the world, I'd suggest that'd be a pretty welcome change for most of us and most of you watching. But if someone comes in and says, we want you to work extra hours and you're already tired, that's the change you wouldn't like to entertain. So there's a good and a bad side to all change. And whether or not it's good or bad, a lot of the time doesn't get down to the nature of the change, but rather our attitude to the change that we're facing. So let's talk a little bit about attitude and look at how a different attitude might give us a different reflection on change. For example, some people might have a fear of the dark. They might just like the lights on. Maybe since you're a little child, you'd like to have the lights on at night. So that fear of the dark stays with us as we grow up, etc. And darkness is something we don't like at all. But if we want to take a different opinion about that, we can look at one of the famous quotes by racial activist Martin Luther King, who once said, it's only in the darkness that we get to see the beauty of the stars. A simple change in attitude can open up an incredibly broad range of possibilities of thinking. The darkness of fear on one side, the darkness of fear of, a sense or the trigger, the gate, the doorway to absolute beauty and insight into the cosmos even on the other hand. So I think that Martin Luther King's statement sort of demonstrates the point I'm making here, that if you're faced with change in your life and you're not looking at it in a way that's positive and you feel it's restricting you and maybe you're facing some disappointment, there's another side of it, another side to the coin. Quite famous in Chinese, I have a lot of Chinese students from time to time, and they tell me that the symbol for opportunity is absolutely the same symbol for disappointment or chaos or regret. It's just a matter of how you look at it in the context in which you fit it. Let me tell you a little story about change of attitude from my own life. Before I became a university professor, which was quite recently, although I've been an adjunct professor at several universities over a long period of time, I did a lot of work in the corporate world. And I remember once I was speaking with a very, very famous group of speakers from America. If there are Americans watching, you may know some of them. Dr. Dennis Waitley, and another guy was Wayne Dyer, who passed away recently, sadly. These guys have sold millions and millions of books in their life. They're very, very famous in the world of developmental psychology and motivation psychology, etc. Well, on this occasion, I was a curtain raiser, and the event was being held in Jakarta in Indonesia. There were about 4,000 people in the room, so it was a big group. Now, because about 2/3 of the people in the room spoke Bahasa, which is the national language of Indonesia, and only 1/3 spoke English, we had to have a translator. And it was not in the days where you had a simultaneous translator and the speaker just speaks and the language comes out in your ears in whatever language you choose to listen to. We had what we call linear translation. So I would say 9 or 10 words, and a professor in English from the Jakarta University, a tiny little woman of great stature who stood perfectly still on stage for the entire presentation and then translated each of those groups of 9 words. Anyway, after a while, I'm thinking, this is getting a bit tedious, and I do like to put a little bit of humour. All of the professors here at the university have now like to use some humour to keep the classes interesting and interactive with the people. And at this stage, I'm thinking, I've got to do something to break up this linear 9 words in one language and another language. So I decided to, against all good advice, to tell a joke. So when I told the joke, there's a little ripple of laughter went through from the 1/3 of the audience who could actually speak English and understood what I said. And then the translator, with a completely straight face, would tell the Bahasa version of the punchline, and the entire audience went completely berserk. They just laughed their heads off, and I thought, well, that worked pretty well. So for the remainder of my presentation, every 8 or 9 minutes, I told this joke. And my attitude was very positive that this is working, so I need to keep going with the jokes. That's what's working for this audience. And my attitude was very positive and single-minded. And I just kept going, and they kept laughing. After the break, in the session, we went to a room to have a cup of coffee before the next session started, and I singled out this professor and said to her, I really must congratulate you. Not only are you getting the sense of the jokes very, very clearly and translating them perfectly, your timing must be excellent because the laughter coming through is brilliant. Thank you so much for helping me. And she looked at me with this very forlorn face and she said, oh, Professor Patching, or Professor Allen, she called me. Professor Allen, I have to tell you the truth. They wouldn't get your jokes. So I just said in Bahasa, he told a joke, please be polite and laugh very loudly. Now, that really changed my attitude to the joke very quickly. And I felt, in one sense, quite foolish. But in the other sense, I thought, how smart of it was this woman to take a situation in the spur of the moment and convert it to something that worked. So I was very quickly able to change from, oh my God, I must have looked like an idiot to that audience, to know, in this team situation, we're able to work in the moment, to work in the now, to come up with a solution that worked very well for everybody and no one need to feel humiliated about the whole thing. So just another example of how change, we can look at the negative. I could have easily said, oh my God, there's 3,000 or 4,000 people who think this Aussie's a complete idiot. But the bottom line was they got the message, they had a bit of a laugh, they probably thought it was quite humorous what she was doing. Everybody went away happy, and I chose to look at the positive side of it. And I think that's a very, very good piece of advice for anybody facing change that they might see some adversity in. So let's just head off, and I know there's a couple of questions focusing around the room. I'm just sort of mucking around with my thing. Here we go. And questions have come up in the background for me. Okay, there's a question here about how does attitude develop? Very good question indeed. Attitude develops as a part of behavioural development for human beings. And it all starts from the moment we're born. From the moment we're born, particularly with our connection with our mother, but other people and our dads as well, but mainly our mother, we're taken and held tightly at the moment we're born. We very quickly start looking for food and nestling onto mum's breast, and we're kept warm, and that connection starts giving suggestions. And the sort of suggestions we get from then on come from our mums, our dads, our teachers, older people. And by the time we're about 6, 7, 8 years old, a lot of our belief system is already formed. Now, once that belief system's formed, anything that happens in life after that which complies with the belief system makes us feel happy or harmonious or neutral about a situation. But if what we're experiencing in the outside world contradicts what we're feeling on the inside world as a consequence of our belief system, in other words, it contradicts our belief system, we're going to feel negative. So our feelings then lead to an attitude. So if someone's talking to us about change and we have a belief system built up by exposure and experience in our past life that says change is scary, change is dangerous, and these sorts of things, then the feeling about change will be quite a negative feeling, and therefore our attitude to change will be negative, and we won't welcome it. We'll feel bad about change. We'll try to avoid change. If, on the other hand, we had parents and life experience that says change is adventurous, change is exciting, let's do something different, it's the joy of life, it's the spice of life, then whenever we have an opportunity to change, we'll probably feel pretty good about it, and our attitude will be positive. Now, all that gets processed in a part of the brain called the limbic system. Now, the limbic system is very difficult to change once it forms an opinion. So if you find yourself really negative to change and not wanting to try something new, it's really because the limbic system has to do with our survival, our sense of safety, and really we need to just try little things different a little bit at a time and look for the good in them. We don't feel like doing something, we decide, let's give it a go for a short amount of time. What was the good about it? What was the bad about it? And just try to bring ourselves out to enjoy what life has to offer beyond the restrictions that we've developed in our belief system in our early years, all of which have probably been developed by our parents and our teachers to keep us safe. But sometimes we can overdo that safety, and we call it the comfort zone, moving out of our comfort zone. But it's not really, it's moving out of a safety zone. And we could go into that in more detail in another session, but there are a couple more questions, and one of them's a rather personal one. I've been asked, well, you're talking about change, old fellow. Are you making any change? Well, I've been making change all my life. In fact, my career story is something of a change. And I'm going to change right now from being dry mouth to having a sip of water. And if you think I've gone to the dark side here, I probably have a little bit, because I've just stood on some electrical equipment and pulled the plug out. So as long as you can still see me, that's okay. That's my fault. I'm just practicing what I preach and getting the film crew to do with change. And look how quickly they dealt with that change. How's that for the project? That's what we want you to do. Learn to take the change challenge in the now and deal with it effectively like our team here has. I started off as someone who failed a couple of subjects at uni, at high school. And I had to go back and do them again. And during that period of time, I worked in the clerical world and built lots of friendships, played lots of sports and enjoyed it. I went back and passed the subject, and I went and did quantity surveying. I like to give them many challenges, and here's another one for them. Now, quantity surveying, if you don't know what it is around the world, is the cost and scheduling and contractual side of the construction industry. I always like to make a joke and say, think of an accountant without their sense of humour, and now you've got a quantity surveyor. But I'm probably being a bit unkind to quantity surveyors there. So, to put myself through that education, because my dad died quite young in life and my mum didn't have a lot of funds for 5 kids, I took on extra work. I worked in the government, and the other thing I decided to do was take up photography, and I actually loved it. So I put myself through university working for a magazine called Rugby League Week, doing sports photography and also as a fashion photographer. Once I got qualified, I worked in quantity surveying, and then I went on to project management. I eventually left the government, started my own project management firm, and out of project management I specialised in certain things, including expert witness. So I spent several years as an expert witness in court. Along the way I was asked to become a negotiator of deals in the construction industry and the development industry. So I went and learnt negotiation. In negotiation I learnt you need to know about people, so I started studying human behaviour. I eventually went on to get a master's degree in human behaviour. And I could keep going with all this sort of stuff, but the point of it is, in my lifetime, I've got command instrument ratings to flying aircraft all the way up to jets. I've done photography, I've done movie work, I've done teaching work, I've done quantity surveying, I've done project management, I still run a counselling clinic, I'm a professor at Bond University, and no doubt there's still more things that I want to do than there are years left for me to do them in. So I'm only telling you that to tell you that I'm now 67 years of age. I absolutely love what I do. I can't even think of the thought of retirement like some of my friends, but I honour their decision to make it, because for me, change has been a constant part of life, and it's been a wonderful part. So if nothing else, if I can put over to you that I'm not speaking from theory, change is being part of who I am, and it's worked extremely well. And I highly encourage you to think about how change can work for you. Now let's try to bring that back to the moment in terms of what might mean something for some of our viewers. Many of you, particularly those in Australia, have probably been looking at your results coming out, your OP scores and various other scores that in a way dictate what university courses you can do. Some of you may have had some disappointment there. Now for those of you who didn't and you got exactly what you wanted to do and all the uni invitations you wanted, congratulations. But for those of you who are expecting an OP 1 or 2 or even 5, whatever you're aiming for, and you got lower than that, and you feel that that really killed your career prospects and what you wanted to do, I encourage you to think about some of the words I'm saying here today, about what change for the better might be possible in the opportunity. What opportunity might lie in the disappointment that you currently feel. And I'm going to ask you to reflect on what you're thinking about, reflect on the experience that you're currently faced, and remember there's a big difference between change and transformation. Change is an adjustment in what you do. Transformation is an adjustment in who you are. Changing your career choice, maybe to come here and do something at the university at now, or whatever your choice of university might be. Changing that career choice, it's just that. It's a change in what you do. It's not an adjustment in who you are. You're still the same person. You're of equal value to yourself, your family, and the world. But maybe the universe is just giving you an opportunity to make a different decision. And keep in mind, when you've exhausted all the possibilities of what you could be doing in your life situation, there are still possibilities you haven't even thought of. Edison, who invented the light bulb, said that. I'd like to continue on and maybe draw to a close with a story from a gentleman called Graham Clark, an Australian. Graham Clark was a doctor who was trying to find a cure for deafness. And he'd come up with several ways of implanting electrodes into the eardrum. And he tested them and experimented and researched, and he failed time and time again. And eventually he came to the conclusion that deafness could not be cured. So one day Graham Clark, who lived in a little town called Camden outside of Sydney in New South Wales in Australia, decided to go down to the beach, I think it was Bondi, wholly disappointed. He was a very spiritual man, and he was praying on the beach and thanking the Lord for whatever reasons this had happened and just accepting his fate that he'd failed. And he found himself subconsciously reaching down and picking up a shell from the sand as he was in his reflective meditative state. And he picked up a long piece of grass and he started threading the grass through the shell. All of a sudden, he had an aha moment. The shell was conical, the same shape as a part of the ear called the cochlea. And he said, what if I put the electrode, inspired by that piece of grass going into that conical shell, what if I put the electrode into the cochlea and not into the eardrum? What would happen? He went back with excitement to his office, and out of that little bit of inspiration made the change from putting the electrode into the eardrum to putting it into the cochlea. And the first guy ever to test it, a guy called Marsh, who'd gone deaf from a motorcycle accident, could immediately hear. The cochlear transplant is famous worldwide through one little change that came to a man who was faced with defeat because things didn't go the way he wanted. If that's your situation at the moment, things didn't go the way you wanted, take message from Graham Clark. Look at the opportunity and the diversity and the problem you're setting. And I'm sure you'll see the insight so that you can find that change is life's only constant. And early in your life, this is an opportunity for you to make something of your life in dire circumstances of disappointment that might make your life better than you ever expected. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I'm Professor Alan Patching from Bond University in Australia, the University of Now.